Hi guys, so DUP MP Sammy Wilson was invited onto Channel 4 to explain why his party is refusing to take up its seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly and form an executive. Ironically, Sammy invoked the issue of consent here, which is part of the Good Friday Agreement, ironically as the DUP were against the 1998 settlement, but are now happy to use it as a stick to beat the Irish government and the EU when a mirror is held up to them. Now, this all follows a flying visit by Prime Minister Boris Johnson to Belfast in an attempt to convince the DUP to join a power-sharing executive. Have a listen.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you at the start.
Okay, good. Well, Boris Johnson says go back to work. Do you think your people will?
Well, we have made it quite clear during the election that for the Assembly to function, the protocol has to go. The protocol is a poison in the system at present. There is no consent for the protocol amongst any of the unionist representatives who attend Stormont. And the whole basis, of course, of the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Good Friday, the arrangements that came from the Good Friday Agreement are that there has to be consent when it comes to any controversial or any important decisions.
Now, the Good Friday Agreement, for the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, it requires consent. But the Northern Ireland Protocol is not part of the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. The protocol has nothing to do with the Good Friday Agreement. But if Sammy is concerned about consent here, well, once again, the Northern Ireland Protocol does not require the consent of both sides of the community in Northern Ireland. But if Sammy Wilson is concerned about consent here, then why was he not concerned when Boris Johnson and Lord Frost were negotiating the withdrawal agreement, which contains the protocol? They did not go to Northern Ireland and ask the people of Northern Ireland for their consent when it came to the withdrawal agreement or the protocol. So Sammy Wilson is happy to talk about consent, but not when it comes to Brexit.
And at present, the protocol does not have the consent of unionists, so therefore the Assembly itself cannot function. It's dysfunctional if you don't have that degree of consent.
But once again, there's no requirement. The protocol and the Assembly are two separate things. The Assembly has no control over the protocol. The people who have control over the protocol are Boris Johnson and the EU. Those are the ones who have control over the protocol. They're the ones who have to implement the protocol, not the Northern Ireland Assembly. This is just an attempt. This is blackmail. This is an attempt to blackmail both the UK government and the EU by the DUP. We want our way, or we're not going to implement the Good Friday Agreement. And remember, the DUP were against the Good Friday Agreement back in 1998. They eventually jumped on board when they saw it could benefit them, but for a long time they were against the Good Friday Agreement. Now they're using it as a cudgel against the EU in particular here.
But you did lose the election and you did want Brexit and consent to the settlement that Boris Johnson gave you. I mean, you don't like what it is now, but doesn't democracy have to take a course here?
Actually, we didn't lose the election. We're the second biggest party in Northern Ireland.
So you didn't win.
We represent.
Now, in defence of the DUP and Sammy Wilson is correct here. There are, in the Northern Ireland, the way the Northern Ireland Assembly works, there aren't really winners and losers. But to an extent, unionism has lost. The DUP did not lose. They came second, but it's not the same as coming second in Westminster, because there is power sharing. So you need both sides included. So Sammy Wilson, in a sense, is correct here. So I'm not going to criticize him. There is no winner and loser. There is first place and second place, but both are treated as the winners, which I think is important to differentiate from Westminster.
The unions, well, there's no winners or losers in a situation where you have a coalition government. we are entitled to be in government as much as any of the other parties.
Yes, you are entitled, but you have decided we don't want to be part of it. And because we have decided not to be part of it, we've taken the ball and gone home, and nobody else can play. And we're not doing it because we don't like the executive. We're not doing it because we don't like the Good Friday Agreement. We're doing it because we backed a Brexit that we thought we would win something from, and we lost. And we want others to suffer the consequences of our bad decision, our poor choice to back a Brexit that we didn't really understand.
Second party, Sinn Féin are the first party, and democracy has to get going, doesn't it?
No, we see, you've been talking on the programme about the Belfast Agreement and its importance of defending it. One of the important aspects of the Belfast Agreement is that parties in the executive have to, there has to be a consent, there has to be consent to the decisions which are made, which affect either the minority community or the majority community.
But once again, the implementation of the protocol is not in the hands of the executive. What he's trying to do here is he's trying to sell people the idea that, look, consent is very important in Northern Ireland. It's part of the Good Friday Agreement. And he's correct. But the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol is not run or organised or implemented by the executive. It's implemented by Boris Johnson's government in Westminster. Him and his government are ultimately responsible, not the Northern Ireland executive. So it's unfair, and obviously Sammy Wilson knows this, so he's obviously lying here. Or I'd be very sorry. It's almost impossible for Sammy Wilson not to understand that. Okay, I have my opinions of Sammy Wilson, but he's not that silly. He understands that he's telling people a fib here. He's trying to sell them something that's not true. The idea that, consent is important in the Good Friday Agreement, and therefore we can't implement the Northern Ireland Protocol because we don't have consent. But once again, it's not the Northern Ireland executive that's implementing the protocol.
Now, there is no consent to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that being the case, then any decisions in the Assembly are going to be impossible until you remove the protocol itself. Because let me just give you an example.
Yeah, but what about the others? Hang on, before we go. I mean, if you say consent is important, are you saying Sinn Féin need to consent to removing the protocol, and everybody else needs to change their minds?
No, and that's exactly the point I'm making. That Sinn Féin can't ignore the fact that there has to be consent from the majority parties in the executive, but equally they can't ignore the fact that the wishes expressed by the electorate who voted for us cannot be ignored.
This is obviously another fib, because the DUP had a 7-point plan. And in that 7-point plan that they sold to the public, they said, vote for us because we have a 7-point plan. And one part of that plan was getting rid of the protocol. Other parts included investing in the NHS, dealing with the cost of living crisis. So people voted for the DUP for a number of reasons. One of them was the Northern Ireland Protocol. But I think for the DUP to say, well, we were going to bring down the protocol, we were going to bring down the executive unless we got the Northern Ireland Protocol done away with. We were going to hold the country to ransom and hold the EU to ransom as well. Then what was the point in having a 7-point plan? Why didn't you just have a 1-point plan and say, we don't care about the cost of living crisis, we don't care about the NHS, we don't care about jobs, we don't care about education, we only care about getting rid of the protocol. And we understand that we can't get rid of it because it's not part of the executive, it's not within the scope of the executive. It's just an attempt to blackmail the EU and the UK government. We're going to take the ball and walk away and stop anyone else from playing. Boris Johnson was in Belfast in Northern Ireland on Monday. He did a lot of blah, blah, blahing, and I'm not sure if it's actually made any progress here. But we'll have to keep an eye on it over the next number of days. But you can see here how the DUP have not changed. The DUP are not interested in democracy. They're not interested in dealing with the problems that are facing Northern Ireland. Their goal is just to get rid of the protocol and replace it with nothing. They do talk about having a agreed regulation, but a problem with that, of course, is that the UK government is not aligning on EU standards with EU standards. It's diverging from EU standards. So if you're diverging, that will require more checks, which the DUP seem to be against. So the DUP should be lobbying the UK government to align on with EU standards. Then there would be fewer checks required. But instead, they're not lobbying the UK government. They're talking about just getting rid of the protocol. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.